Good morning. So I have this whole skit in my head. When I talked this afternoon of doing the good morning thing, usually we say, oh, it's not good enough. We do it again. You get louder, etc. I'm gonna make this the most dramatic version of that I can possibly do. And I'm gonna ask you again, or I'm gonna greet you again this afternoon on stage. And I'm gonna give you another opportunity to do that. And at that point, leading up to that, I want you to think about your energy levels and think about how much energy you can bring even at the closing of a 3, 4, 5, 6 day amazing conference event. But good morning. It's amazing to see you all. How many people went out to the water park party last night? Lots of hands, lots of positive energy around that, I would imagine, lots of tired energy. Unfortunately, I'm one of those people who, no matter how late I stay up, I wake up at my regular-ish time. So I went to bed at 12:30 or 1, woke up at 5:15, took care of the baby, and I got a text. And you might be wondering why I am on stage, and I'm kind of choking up. I'm a very emotional speaker. Like if I'm nervous, I get emotional, and this is particularly a little different situation for me. So I got a text from Clark this morning to say that last night he was having issues with blood pressure or maybe his heart. Something was going wrong, and they were going to the ER today. And so he asked me to fill in. And so there's lots of different mixed emotions when I have of thinking about that. I love being on stage. I love the spotlight, to be honest. But definitely mixed emotions to be here. But I think one of the things that would be very valuable is to take a second and actually bring some of that energy back, specifically for Clark. And the reason I say that is because the amount of energy and effort and love and passion that Clark has poured into you, has poured into us, has potentially some effect of why he's having these issues. But I think that just speaks to who he is and how sometimes he just can't help himself. I'll be honest, he sent a message and he gave this update and he said, I don't want to get into the medical details because I don't want to misspeak, but he basically said like, oh, something happened. It's good though. They're going to check me out and I'll be back by lunchtime. I'm like, Clark, will you just not do that? Like just stay somewhere and let other people worry about you for just 5 minutes. But after investing the amount of time and energy and passion and excitement and all that Clark has for all of you, for all of us, I can only imagine how difficult it is for him to be away. So can we get one big round of applause with as much energy as you actually have? Appreciation for Clark, appreciation for what's going on here, and appreciation for that conference. So Clark texted me, and actually myself and Taylor Destiny, he was like, can one of you open up, get on stage? And I said I'd be glad to do it. I would love to do it. And there's also a lot of pressure that comes with that. Like, I don't know if you think about what Clark does to get prepared for these moments on stage. Have you ever thought about this? Clark gets on stage every morning to open for the keynote. Clark comes back on stage after the keynote with a brand new talk because he can't help himself in a good way. Clark then comes back at the end of the day and basically does another keynote that he makes up on the spot. Clark more or less does 6 to 10 keynotes every conference he gives. And they look very polished to me. They look very relevant to me. They look very thought through to me. But I got a little insight into how he does this. Clark sent me a text. He said, all right, you can do it. Thank you. And he said, I'll send you the bullet points of what to cover. No slides required. Okay. He said, talk about energy levels. We'll talk about that more. He said to do some housekeeping things, which we'll talk about in a second. He said to bring up something from yesterday and tie that into the impact of the community. And if you think back to every time he's been on this stage, he does exactly that. He always has some story or some set of stories that relate back to things that happened the day before, that relate back to the community and the benefit of us being here together. So he's literally just making this stuff up, like, I don't know how long before, but he has like a template of 6 bullet points, and he goes out and creates a new keynote every time he gets up here. And so I'll be talking this afternoon, but I feel like there's much more pressure for me, on myself maybe, of not just kind of being my own speaker, but trying to replace or step in for a speaker that has given 100 keynotes on the stage over the course of 10 years. And when I was getting mic'd up, I didn't know this was a thing, but they said, oh, you're giving him Clark's mic. I was like, I wish you wouldn't have said that, because that feels like a lot of pressure. So I want to go back to energy levels. A lot of people stayed at the water park last night. A lot of people were out probably later than you normally are, probably a little slow getting in this morning, a little sluggish, understandable, me too. But the one thing I know Clark would say, actually I'm cheating because he actually texted me this, but I'll tell my own story about it. The one thing I do know based on text that he would say is to not take your foot off the gas pedal. And I talk about this a lot with my wife, and she sometimes gets frustrated by this. She's in the back. You can go ask her more about this later. When I go to a conference, I give everything that I have. I'm more naturally extroverted, I think, than most. Taylor Desson, one of my very good friends here, who I think is always on and energetic, struggles with his energy level, and at a certain time, he's like, I like y'all a lot, but I got to go. I got to get out of here. But I try to give every single thing that I have, and that's different for everyone, but I give every single thing that I have at every conference I attend. That means showing up to every event that I can. That means showing up as late as possible. Sometimes that's different. Sometimes it's 8 o'clock like it was the first night. I was like, oh, we should go out for drinks and all these things, and then I went to bed at 8. Stayed up last night, but I give everything I have, and we still have more to get out of this conference, that conference. We have a full day. We've got talks, we've got open spaces, we've got hallway track. We still have one more day to get the most we possibly can. And I'll kind of circle back to this when I talk this afternoon, the impact of what we have at our disposal here and how we can take advantage of that. So I encourage you to take advantage of every minute that you have, because this sort of thing is special. Everyone that's been on this stage has talked about this in some capacity. I've been to a lot of conferences. I've been a professional speaker for 10 years now. I've been to a lot of events. I've rarely seen, it's repetitive, but the passion, the excitement, and the community focus, and someone willing to give everything they have like Clark does. And not just Clark, because this is, like, I want to call that out, but also from you. Because Clark isn't able to do what he does. The team isn't able to do what they do if the energy and the engagement and the participation is not there. So I'm gonna go based on the script. The script said to relate something yesterday back to community. And there's actually a really personal one. So my wife played soccer in college. It was actually, I kind of told the story yesterday, I found out she was a soccer player, and I was immediately interested to learn more about her. But we played soccer some in college together. We then went on to every city we've moved to. That's been our connection to the community, quite honestly. That's the first community that we find is somewhere to play soccer together. And so we've played co-ed soccer together 10 plus years. We do that as much as we can. And something special happened last night where we got to share a passion for the women's national soccer team, to watch the World Cup game on these big screens and share that with other people. And so I learned about, some people have kids that play soccer, some people played soccer themselves, but we had this additional thing to bond over that was more than just code. And so I want to remind you, as you look across the table, as you look across the different parts of the room, as you look at speakers, as you look at attendees and sponsors and staff and everyone that's here, I want you to remember that we individually are much more than just tech. We're much more than just the code that we write. We're much more for developers that are here than the tickets we close. We're much more of that, much more than that. We all have interests, we all have excitements, we all have passions. That's the reason these open spaces exist. And if you listen to the topics that got called out on the first day, There's much more than just tech. And that was a very cool example for me to share, or just to be a part of something that's very special to myself and my wife with the broader community that was here listening in. There was another story. I was kind of preparing my notes, and I was sitting at the table, and I heard Mandy talking, who's down in front, and I wasn't quite paying attention, but I heard a couple of buzzwords, and I asked Mandy if she could just give me a 30-second summation of the last 5 minutes of what she had been saying. And what she was talking about was connections that she had made at that conference. So Mandy's currently looking for her next role, and she talked about a community that she has been a part of, a very special community that I like to raise awareness for. In Virtual Coffee, Becca is sitting down in front. Learn more about Virtual Coffee, ask Becca all the things. And so through that community, through that Slack community, Mandy got connected to Brian Rinaldi, and she said eventually got the courage to reach out to him directly and say, we should meet at that conference. Not knowing that if that specifically leads to anything, but I've heard there's potential offer of mentorship, and maybe more importantly, an offer for a ride to the airport. So you never know what you'll get out of the connections that you make here. But the other part of that is not only did she make personal connections from individual people, she also made connections to companies. And she went to a booth. She kind of talked to the people there. And she, I think, was not very encouraged of potentially applying, that a lot of people had applied and maybe hadn't heard anything, or just it was a lot of applicants, and she didn't think that she thought she might not stand out to get visibility. So she went to the booth, she kind of explained her background, her story, what she's looking for, her experience, etc. And I think they sent Mandy a direct link to apply. And then at 3:15 in the morning, it's in my notes somewhere, at 3:15 in the morning, got an email to schedule her first interview. This is a particularly special moment. It's relevant to me. I was let go from my job almost exactly a year ago. And my network is everything to me. And Mandy proved, and has countless other stories if you want to talk to her more about it, has proved that just going up and talking to someone at a conference might be that connection that decides whether or not you get that next job or not. That's repetitive. That might be the deciding factor in you getting that next job. So Mandy, thank you to yourself, I guess, for taking that step. The other thing I'll mention about Mandy is her and Clark apparently have talked, and she is currently manifesting to be on this stage to explain that story in more detail in a couple of years. That's cool. I'll talk more about my journey specifically later, from attendee to being on the stage, but I can't wait to see what she's able to do in a couple of years. So, a couple of logistical things going down my checklist that Clark gave me. I was told you should check Lost and Found. I can only imagine how many things are in Lost and Found right now after 3-4 days of people running around and kids and all the things. So Lost and Found is at the registration desk. The swag store is still open. I went to make sure I checked inventory earlier, so I didn't tell you to go buy things that aren't there. But swag store is open, hoodies, shirts, coffee, hot sauce, which can someone reserve me one? Because I need to get one of those. Hot sauce, coffee. Coffee's delicious. So anything interested in the swag store, check that out. There's also a survey, and I didn't get slides from Clark, but there is on your table, thank you, on your table, there's a name for that. My wife is an event, or has been an event, she would know the name of it. Whatever that placard card thing is, has a QR code on it that has a survey to give feedback on that conference. I'm not going to pause enough for you to actually go and do that now, but I do want to pause enough to emphasize the impact that feedback has. Knowing Clark relatively well, he would want you to be honest, because he does everything he can and the team does everything they do to make this as beneficial for you as possible. So please take the time, fill out the survey, give valuable feedback so that he can have that and they can continue to make this better and better. In addition to that, if you do that, you get a $400 discount off your ticket for next year in Wisconsin. Second event update is the Austin version of that conference. It's coming up. I think it's the last day or two of January, bleeding into February, I believe. Double check me on that. Currently in kind of a early registration. There's an early bird code. So it's $300 off for that ticket. I attended that one last year with several people that are here in attendance as well. Amazing, similar, awesome. Go and check it out if you're looking for your next conference to be at, and if it's because you can't wait a year to come back here. All right, there's one thing that's personal. I have a philosophy that's personal to me, and it's learn, build, teach. And so the idea as developers or in the tech community, we spend a lot of time learning. That never ends. Anyone's learning journey over? Probably not. You use what you learn to build stuff, whether it's for a job or a personal project or whatever, and then you take that and you teach other people how to do it too. And the reason you do that is twofold, only one of which is selfish. Twofold is you benefit the community. You teach other people how to do that thing too. And then selfishly, you get better at understanding that thing, and I think we've heard people talk about this. The best way to learn is to teach. The best way to learn in depth is to teach. And so I found out from Clark that I would kind of do opening remarks and kind of give some of my thoughts, but much more importantly is to introduce Lucia, who is coming up next. And we had a few minutes to sit down and chat, and we've interacted online. This is the first time that we've gotten to meet in person, and I was very excited to meet you. I don't know if it was reciprocal, but I'm very happy about it. And so we talked a little bit about her teaching background and teaching Montessori school, which I actually went to Montessori school for kindergarten or pre-K or whatever it was. And she talked about teaching and kind of the different perspectives that I think she'll get into on teaching, but that really resonated with me from the perspective of something that I think about every day, which is learn, build, teach. And like many other people, she took COVID as an opportunity to learn a new skill and to break into tech. This is a fairly common story, I think, but a very impactful one because I look at what, having taught boot camps myself, the impact that going through a boot camp, that teaching yourself to code can have on not just your career, but your life. So, from learning to code only a few years ago, during the pandemic, to sharing her journey on the big stage here, please give a warm welcome to Lucia Cerchie.
Thank you for that warm welcome, James. I appreciate it so much. I'd also like to thank Clark, even though he isn't here, and everyone who has put work into making this conference what it is. I've only been here for, I think, less than 24 hours. That's when I could make it, and I've already had such a great experience and felt such a good vibe from this community. And I really appreciate it. I'd also like to thank our sponsors, without whom we couldn't have this conference. And I'd like to thank each and every one of you in the audience for giving me your time and your attention and your energy today. Those are three of the most valuable things that you have as human beings, and that's just such a gift. So when I was writing this talk, I thought, well, what gift can I give in exchange? What topic can I give this talk? Because I'd like to give everyone something to walk away with. There's a wide range of participants in tech here. We have children and teenagers, we have staff engineers, I'm sure we have other people in tech too, like community managers. What's something that we can all talk about together later in the day? And it came to me that we could talk about observation and what that brings to the tech field. And because sometimes to observe properly, we really have to flip our perspective around. I called this talk Upside Down and Inside Out. So here's a little map of where we're going today together. First, we are starting in the field of teaching with the Montessori method. Then we'll move forward and look at what the practice of observation can bring to design. And then lastly, we'll see what that brings to tech. So my name is, as James has let you know, is Lucia Cerchie. I am a developer advocate at Confluent, where we make the world a better place for Kafka developers. If you don't know what Kafka is, come talk to me afterwards. You might be sorry that you did, though, because I'll talk your ear off. Now, if you're wondering what a developer advocate is, you're not alone. I get that question a lot. And really what we do is we code stuff, and then we talk about it. And we talk about it in a lot of different venues, like blog posts, live streams, videos, and talks like this one. Really, I believe developer advocates represent kind of an intersection of content, community, and code. So basically, we help teach people about tech. Now, speaking of teaching, another thing about me that I usually mention in my introductions is kind of like a fun fact, but has more of a prominent role in today's talk, is that I used to be a teacher. I also used to be a certified nursing assistant and a digital marketer. So getting into tech was kind of this windy path for me. And if you stopped me along any one of those points, you might not guess that I'd be where I am today. But if you looked at what I did when I was a kid for fun, you might not be surprised. Now, this is seriously what I did for fun when I was a kid. I'm not kidding. But it's pretty common career advice when someone's looking for a career that they're passionate about to ask them, well, what were some of the things that gave you joy and that brought you into deep focus when you were a child? And that brings them in touch with their authentic selves. And I think that I'm still kind of doing this today. This is something I still enjoy doing. So I didn't enjoy the SAT part of this, by the way. I have like a bone to pick with standardized testing. But I enjoyed puzzles. And even more than the puzzle part, I enjoyed helping other people understand how to solve them themselves. I would create these illustrations, and I would write about it. And here I am, still blogging and teaching, but for work today. This is a picture of me in my first job ever. I was right out of college. I promise there's like 30 fourth graders in there, but I cropped them out for their privacy. And I started out in a traditional classroom, and I made a bunch of assumptions. So I assumed that it was the role of the students to conform to the four walls of that classroom, and to the tests, and to my rules. And that was not a great experience for the students, but it also wasn't a great experience for me. For example, there was this beautiful day. It was like a gorgeous October Phoenix day, and I think we were going through the 7 times tables, and my students were fidgety because it was beautiful outside. And what I did to try to encourage them to focus was start taking away minutes from an outdoor activity we had scheduled later. So that just points to the perspective that I was taking at that time. So not having enjoyed that year very much and being at a type of crossroads, I decided to try something new and get a nursing assistant certificate. And if you're not aware of what a nursing assistant does, they help out nurses, they take vitals, they make sure patients are comfortable. And over that summer, I found out that the medical profession wasn't for me either. These used to be my professional tools. Now they're my daughter's favorite dress-up toys. So again, I was kind of at a crossroads, and I want to make a side note here. So if you, or if somebody that you love, if they're switching paths a lot, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. So all of this turbulence that I was going through at this point in my life and my career was necessary to me finding out that I actually do love teaching, and I love teaching about tech and Kafka and things like that. But not everybody's career journey is linear. It's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn. That's a quote from Todd Parr. He's one of my favorite children's book authors. He also says, no matter how your hair looks, always feel good about yourself. And I think if everyone took Todd Parr's aphorisms to heart every day, just got up and with those words in their minds, I think the world would be a better place. But anyway, I had a friend who at that point offered to refer me for a new gig. It was as a teaching assistant at a Montessori school. And not really knowing what to do otherwise, I took it. And I want to mention that I didn't have a degree or a certification in the Montessori method, but just spending 1 year helping out in a Montessori classroom changed my life. It effected this Copernican shift in my approach to teaching. So it was as if I had assumed that the sun was going around me, that I'd found out that actually the earth goes around the sun. And I really began to enjoy teaching again, and I spent some years doing it. But after a while, after I spent some time teaching, I came to a season of life where I needed to decide when I took my time off, and teaching occasionally has a good amount of time off involved, but you cannot time it. And so I transitioned into digital marketing. And I learned to make stuff, and I learned to measure the content, and it was fun. I still use some of those skills later today. And then after that, I had this awesome baby girl, and the pandemic hit. Now, I firmly believe that all babies are good babies, right? They just haven't had a chance to mess anything up yet. But my baby was also an easy baby. And when she was around 2 months old, I got bored, and I was stuck at home during the pandemic, and I started learning to code. And so it's basically me just writing my first line of code at age 26, baby in one hand, typing with the other. Also, thanks to my husband, who was working from home at the time and supporting that. And now I'm here in tech. But I'd like to go back to teaching and to observation and how that can help us in tech where we are right now. So, Dr. Maria Montessori lived from 1870 to 1952. And she was a medical doctor, not a PhD doctor. And this meant that she was trained in using her senses to observe patients. So, when you go into the doctor, you have a cough, they'll listen to you, they'll use their ears, and then they can determine from what they hear whether you have a cold, maybe it's pneumonia, hopefully not, maybe you're healthy. But using her senses to observe children helped her develop a teaching method that spread like wildfire across the globe. It's now used in 154 different countries. Now, along with the psychologists Freud and Piaget, she was one of the first people to see children as humans, but in a developmentally different stage, right? Not as just like small adults, and not just assuming that children think in the same way that she did. And that perspective that she took, that was not very common in her time. She wrote a lot about it. If you're interested, you can Google her books online. They're super fun to read. But we're not going to go into that today. I'm going to speak from an experience that I had in a classroom that was faithful to her methods. Pardon me. So my first week in a Montessori classroom was unlike any other first week that I had on a job. I don't know if you've had a job at a big company, but often I spend that time, you'd end up watching HR videos. Or if you had a small company, you're jumping into the code right away. There's many companies out there that do ask you to spend some time in observation first, and that's really great and admirable, I think. Observation in the Montessori teaching world means just doing observation and doing nothing else. And the really hard part there is doing nothing else. So it's not hard to like sit on the floor and watch a 2-year-old do a puzzle and take notes. By the way, Montessori teachers, they're always observing at posturally the level of the student, and they're also psychologically assuming the perspective of the child as well. But it's hard to spend 10 minutes using our powers of observation without leaning on our powers of assumption. So here's 2 observations. One is that Raina loves to paint. The other is that Raina selected painting work at 9:05 this morning and again at 10:15. Now, the first observation actually makes a big assumption about the internal state of the child. And the second observation is a note about the child's external actions. So then from like extended collections of these purely observational notes, you can make inferences about your student. So say like Raina, she picks the painting work like every day this week. Okay, maybe she's having a moment with painting in colors. Let's try offering her pastels. But the notes themselves, those have to be unclouded by judgment and assumption. Because making judgments means making mistakes about the true state of the other person. So my child, when she was 2, had this really cute little phrase, and she would go up to me and my husband, her dad, and say, "Happy." And we'd say, "Oh," we'd assume, it's so sweet that she's saying she's happy, but why did she throw a big tantrum every time afterwards? And we later found out that she was trying to say, "Help me," and I still feel bad about that one. But do you see how different this is from when I was starting out teaching, trying to impart my own view of the world onto a student without understanding them first? This observation in the Montessori style is a lot of mental work. It feels kind of like a type of like meditative exercise, and it can be exhausting, but it's really valuable to practice this type of observation. I recommend going home and practicing on your kids or your pets, going to a coffee shop and observing people there. It's like using a new muscle, but it's a skill that we can transfer to many, many, many different areas of our life. So today we're going to do 1 minute of observation together. So you can take out your iPhone, your iPad, or your computer, or good old pen and paper, and take some notes with me on a video. Thank you to the Napier Aquarium for providing this 1 minute video. It's going to be on a fish feeding. A little warning. The camera is literally on a diver's head, so if it makes you dizzy or for some other reason you cannot observe the video, I encourage you to use your senses to observe the people around you and spend this minute with us observing. So we had a minute of technical difficulty, but I believe we're back online. There we go. All right, so the video goes on for a little bit longer, but that concludes our minute of observation right there. Can anyone offer me an observation on the stingray? Yeah, it was up on the diver's knee. That's a great objective observation. I love it. Can we infer anything about the stingray from the fact that it was up on the diver's knee at the feeding time? Yeah, maybe it was. I don't know if we can, that's a great hypothesis, but I don't know if we can actually, it was kind of a trick question, I don't know if we can actually infer anything about it yet, because it could be hungry. That's absolutely correct. It could also kind of hate the fish and want to get in front of their food, or maybe it really loves the diver and is coming up to say hi. Let's see, there we are, yep. And so at that point, we can't tell what the stingray wants or doesn't want yet. So practicing this observation daily, this helped me a lot. And teaching began to be my home. And it actually led to my biggest professional accomplishment while I was teaching. So I left the Montessori school after that year, and I became a literacy coach at a classical school. And what that meant was every classroom, there's about 20 classrooms, had some students who were struggling to read, and they would get pulled out by a TA, and they'd work on their reading skills. And so by the second year there, I had taken charge of that program, and with the help of all of those wonderful teachers, we introduced some more observation and some more testing, which, if used and viewed correctly, is observation. And we saw the graduation rates in that program rise around 30% in 1 year, and that was in a year when we had more students total in the program than we had before. So that's what observation can bring to the teaching field. Let's see what it brings to another field. Just a moment while we get the slides back up. So what I'm going to talk about next is you can, of course, when you have a mentor in person, gain a lot from their experience. But if you have there's someone out there in the world, a scientist or somebody in tech, that you deeply admire, you do not have to know them in person to, quote unquote, receive mentorship from them. And I think that's really important to understand, that you can be following someone and following their mindset and learning from them if they're putting stuff out there and really enjoying what they're teaching you without having to understand. You can glean things without having to know them in person. And I think that's just a really beautiful thing about being a human being in this world, is we can communicate with different pieces of technology and learn that way. And so the person that I'm about to introduce you to, I have never met, but it's someone who I admire a lot, and they work in the field of design. We are almost there with our slides. So, yes, that's perfect. Thank you. So Austin Kleon is a content expert. And he says, you don't want to look like your heroes, you want to see like your heroes. And that resonated with me because when I was younger, one of my heroes was Gandalf, and I would dress up as Gandalf for Halloween. And I no longer want to wear a pointy hat and have a righteous beard all the time, but I do admire his wisdom as a character in that book. And we're going to talk about one of my heroes in real life. His name is Don Norman, and he wrote The Design of Everyday Things. And Don Norman also sits and sat on the board of many different companies, including organizations like DARPA, like Toyota, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, he has range and the ability to solve a lot of problems. And what this comes from is his approach to observation. Now, how did he get started observing? Well, at 4 a.m. on, I believe it was a morning in March in 1979, there was a very bad accident. It was on 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, and it was the worst commercial nuclear accident the United States had ever seen. Now, compared with nuclear accidents the world over, the damage to the surrounding community was fairly minimal, but they never wanted this accident to happen again. What exactly happened? As you can see, the control room is not intimidating at all. But what happened was, basically, there was a switch that was flipped in the control room, and then the light went on when that switch was flipped. The light actually did not indicate that the valve that was supposed to close was closed. It just indicated that the switch was flipped. And so an assumption was made by the operator that the valve was closed when it really was open. Steam was going into the wrong chamber, and the plant overheated. Now, if you're like me and you like just like sitting down with a cup of coffee and a technical debriefing or a postmortem, then you can read the full report of this accident online. It's from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I find it thrilling, so I recommend it. Now, the company that owned this plant flew in experts from all around to analyze this accident and see what caused it. And Don Norman was one of them. Now, when you hear people tell this story, they'll say, Don Norman was such a design expert that they flew him in, and that is absolutely true. But if you hear him recount the story in his own accounts and his talks, then you might hear something a little different, which is that this analysis, this experience on this committee, changed his approach to design. So this is a bit of a long quote to read out, but I think it's great, so I'm going to. It said, "Machines are so logical. If we didn't have people, everything would work so much better." Yep, that's how I used to think. So Don Norman, from his experience seeing this committee, look at the users and the operators and not blaming them immediately and looking at the whole system of design to see what failed, he was able to change his approach, and so instead of blaming users, he started studying them. So, like Dr. Montessori, Don Norman now uses observation as a not-so-secret weapon. Now, what did this practice of observation lead to for Don Norman? That's a picture of my shower head, by the way. We'll get to it. But we are going to learn a little something about design by analyzing that. It led him to this philosophy of human-centered design. And his daily observations of humans and how they use things like appliances led Don Norman to come up with some helpful words that we can use to talk about design. So those words are affordance, signifier, mapping, and feedback. So we'll go into a little bit about how observation led him to discover these things. Now, affordance is it's a relationship between two things. One of them is the capabilities of the user, and the other is the properties of the object that the user is about to use. And the key thing really to remember about an affordance is that it is a relationship. So this is a picture of the London Underground, which I was very new to recently, but I saw that there were hinges on these doors, which is a property of that object, and I was able to walk through them at the time. And so I did. I used that affordance. And Don Norman's observations of people using visible affordances like that made him comfortable with introducing this term to the design community. And then everybody started using it. Now, Again, I just want to emphasize when you think about an affordance, it is a relationship. So a staircase is meant to afford transport between floors, right? But if for some reason you're having trouble using stairs, maybe you use a wheelchair, maybe you're trying to get a grand piano between floors, the staircase is not going to afford that. It is a relationship between the capabilities of the user and the properties in an object. Now, Don was watching people adopt this term affordance, and he started noticing that they were using it for all kinds of things, and it led him to make a distinction. And this distinction led him to come up with the term signifier, which refers to any perceivable indicator that communicates appropriate behavior to a person. So basically, a signifier communicates. So he was observing people in the design community, and they were referring to all sorts of things as affordances, which were not really affordances. For example, they were referring to an exit sign above an exit door as an affordance, when really that's telling you about your ability to exit there. And so it's signifying, and that's not the affordance. Another term he came up from his keen observations of human behavior was mapping, or taking advantage of spatial analogies. And when I first read this, I thought, what's a spatial analogy? And basically, it's when the space around you is designed to fit your cultural or innate assumptions. So for example, to move a video game character forward, we hit this up arrow or the joystick toggle and move that forward. And that's a mapping between the movement of our hands and the movement of the character in the game. Now, Don Norman came up with the word mapping because he observed that without good mapping, people struggle. And he saw them struggle often with things like stove burners, for example. So mapping the controls of whatever you're using to the direction of the thing that you want to move, that helps. On the right, we have, this is a control that controls the movement of the wheels in an airplane, up and down. So when you move that lever up, the wheels go up. When you move them down, they go down. And that lever is even shaped like a little wheel. Now, some mappings are cultural, and it can be surprising to many of us which of them are, depending on which cultures we understand. So, for example, Don Norman was giving a presentation in Japan. And as he got up and started getting comfortable and introducing himself, he hit the clicker, and he realized that he was unable to use it. And it turned out it was because instead of pressing the up arrow to move himself through the slides, he had to press the down arrow to move the slide towards him. And this is because in some cultures, we see ourselves as moving through a timeline towards the future, but in others, we see the timeline of the future moving towards us. And as a side note, I think this is really interesting because that points out that time is relative. It's like a sign that time is relative, but that's not what this talk is about. So, the last term that Don Norman came up with, that we'll touch on today, he came up with a lot of them, is feedback. And that is really just some way of letting you know that the system is working on your request. So Don Norman used observation of human behavior to notice that people had expectations of systems, and they were happy when those expectations were confirmed. So he would watch people at a red light, for example, tense up, and wait for the expectation of the green light to confirm that the traffic lights were working. If you use one of those fridges that generates ice for you, you take your cup, you press it against the lever, it compresses the lever, and you start to hear rumbling. That is feedback that the system of the fridge's ice system is working for you. There's also feedback when you turn the key in a gasoline-powered car. You'll hear the rumble. When you press the button in an electric car, you'll see the light turn on. As a side note, it always scares me a little bit when the feedback is not directly related to the original system. Like, we don't know if the lights turn on automatically because it's connected to the system of the electric car's engine or if that's a different system altogether. But if you turn a key in the gasoline-powered car, you'll hear the motor before it starts. Not a knock on EVs, by the way. I think they're super cool. The point is, good feedback needs to be both truly informative and also almost immediate. Otherwise, we get a little nervous. Like, if you've used a vending machine before where you put your card in and you press the button, and then you don't receive the feedback of the vending machine moving whatever treat it is towards you, you might get nervous that you're going to pay twice, right? So good feedback is important. Now let's dive into an example that uses all of these terms. Now, how many of you have ever tried to use the shower in someone else's home? I certainly have. How many of you have tried and failed miserably? That's also me. This is a picture of my current shower dial. Don't worry, I got the caulking fixed like soon after I took this photo. But let's use these terms to look at this and see what could be improved. Now, as a caveat, I'm not suggesting that I could do a better job here. Like, maybe this shower dial wasn't originally designed for the showers or something going on that I don't know. I'm not a plumbing expert. But let's use it to see how useful Don Norman's terms that he came up with from observation are. So let's take a look at the signifier. There's a signifier that reads temp there, but I could not tell when I was trying to figure out my own shower which way was hot and which way was cold. So there's an improvement that could be made to the signifier there. Also, there is no indication of mapping. I didn't know which dial there. There's two of them, the clearer one and the one that's a little more yellowed. I didn't know which dial released water. Now, the one advantage of this particular shower was that the feedback was very immediate. The water came out right away, and it responded to the turns of the dial. So it only took me about 5 minutes to figure this out through trial and error. In contrast, we have this shower dial from a hotel that I was recently in. I'm really interested in shower dials and usability, so sometimes I take pictures of really good ones. Anyway, so this one, the designer gave some thought to the mapping, and they mapped it to thermostat functionality. So if you turned it clockwise, the water would both turn on and the heat would increase. And the signifiers there were both, they were obvious to me. It said hot and cold. Now, I understood the signifiers immediately, but then I thought, actually, there is an improvement we can make here. Many cultures map the color red to hot and the color blue to cold, so perhaps those words could be colored, right? And then that way, someone who maybe didn't read English or somebody who didn't read could also understand how to use this shower dial immediately. The other problem with this shower was that for some reason the shower head was like 6 feet away from the shower dial, so the feedback was not immediate. I had to like walk over and check and walk over and check. But luckily, initially the mapping was correct, so it was a little bit easier to figure out than that first shower dial. So from the analysis of this really common problem that most of us have, we can see that Don Norman's observations have given us some very useful terminology to discuss problems like this. And now, I don't know if I'm going between 20 and 40 minutes, but either way, the elementary school teacher in me will never die, and I would not have let my students sit that long without taking a little stretch break. So I'm going to lead you through some stretches. You can do them sitting, or I invite you to stand at this point. And we have a lot of room here. I was designing some for like an auditorium, so they're going to be pretty mild. Yes, I love the energy there. Let's keep it up. So with the arms above the head, it doesn't matter which one you put up first. Take your arm with your wrist, or take your wrist with the other arm, and then we're already bending over, and take a breath here, and just let that cramped up energy out of your side. And we're going to go over to the other side, switch hands. That feels good. Now, give yourself a little hug. Tickle your shoulder blades if you can reach them. Your back. Okay, now we're going to switch which arm is on top. And I think we have the room to do this here. I wasn't going to do this, but let's do a little stretch like this where we put out one leg, and you kind of get into your hip flexor there, because those can get tight at conferences, but also when we're working at home. I don't know about you, but I curl over my computer like a cooked shrimp when I work, and it's really helpful to stop and do some of these stretches. We'll switch to the other one. And then the last thing is we'll try to get into our hamstring. All you have to do that, we don't have to bend all the way over, is put your leg out with your foot at an angle there, and then just kind of bend over. And you can feel your hamstring. It wants to be released. And then towards the other side. Okay, I think we're ready to get back to sitting and thinking now. So first, we saw how when I encountered the art of observation in a classroom, it really changed my happiness teaching and the effectiveness of my teaching. We've also seen that it applies to other fields. When Don Norman brought observation to design, he came up with an entirely new philosophy of design that was really useful. Now, how do we use observation in tech? So what if we're not just observing children? What if we're not just observing people using hardware appliances? What if we are designing software applications? So let's get technical for a little bit here. Say we have some code, and this code represents a point of exchange between the server and the client. I'd like to say there's also a point of exchange between the developer and the code. This human needs to understand what's going on. So really, I think of software as having two fundamental problems, which is how to get computers to talk to each other, and then how to get humans to understand code, and humans and computers to talk to each other. So we're going to focus on one of those problems. I like to think of it as human-centered software, but how do we make it nice for humans and computers to interact? Now, you have to forgive me for this slide. I was using Canva templates, and this was the first one I came up with. It's a little whimsical. We know that in real life, it feels like this more of the time, right? And it can be frustrating to try to understand code and try to understand computers. But luckily, we can apply Dr. Montessori's and Don Norman's observational principles to help us understand how to provide a better experience to humans in our tech community. But how do we find the gaps in the software experience? It can be really hard when we're making those technical tools ourselves to understand when, where, and why they're hard to use, right? My daughter came up to me the other day in a panic and said, Mom, I can't see my own eyeballs. And I kind of had to talk her down from that ledge, but it's true, we can't see our own eyes without the help of a mirror or something, and I think in many cases we cannot see the own gaps that we create in software until we watch somebody else use them, right? And I do want to make a note here, I'm not just talking about something that might be useful for user design researchers. So, or it's not, it's useful for all of us, no matter where we are and who we are in tech. And also, sometimes this is spoken about under the guise of developers should understand business concerns. And they absolutely should understand business concerns, but they should also understand other developers. So for me, as a developer advocate, this means listening to the developer community. And I realize this is a little bit ironic because I'm talking in this picture, but it's the most recent one I could find. But it means listening to the developer community in lots of different venues, including things like social media, open source, meetups, informal conversations. Even just logging my own friction and giving feedback to product can be helpful. But really, I'm listening for the gaps in the understanding of developers and understanding what's a gap in their understanding versus what could be a gap in my own content, and then letting that inform what and how I teach. So a specific example, I was adapting a demo recently, and the point of the demo was to show people how to pipe live data into Kafka, which is a data streaming platform. And the data was AIS data, or data from automatic ID systems for ships that comes in. They radio out really interesting things like their current location and their speed, and you can collect that. And it's in a GPS format. So you need this utility that decodes the GPS format into JSON. And this was the original instructions that I gave developers for following that demonstration, right? It worked on my machine. And luckily, though, I had some coworkers who were willing to play the part of developers for me to observe. And they said, hey, what about different operating systems? Because this isn't working for me. This is a sticking point. And so I ended up writing the instructions for some different operating systems here. Another point where observations helped me is recently I had this intro to Kafka talk, and I was pretty proud of it. I thought, I'm enabling beginners, because once they're done with this talk, they know what the components of Kafka are, and they've got a Kafka cluster in the cloud. But the first few times that I gave this talk, I got the same question, which was, well, why would I use Kafka in the first place? And that helped me realize that I needed to address that gap in a beginner's understanding, but also that I needed to address that gap in my content. And so that's how observation helps me every day as a developer advocate. Next up, I wondered what it might look for someone with a different role in tech. And this is Becca Harrett-Weigel, and she co-founded a community online called Virtual Coffee, and she's also spent some time professionally as a community manager. So I asked her, what does observation look like for you? And I just want to note, if you're wondering what a community manager is, they monitor digital spaces as well as in-person ones, and they help shepherd the health of communities, and sometimes they do that for companies. Now, Becca's answer was great. She said, first of all, communities are made up of people. People can change, they're mutable, and as they grow, they develop things like rituals that you want to observe and support. This could be like a monthly meetup, or maybe biannually they have a new member meet and greet. She also said community managers often have these things called gut reactions. But in her opinion, these gut reactions are actually built on years and years of experience observing communities and also observing the historical behavior of the community that they're in. Lastly, Becca told me that for community managers, practicing observation is really key to the health of those communities, and it prepares them for hard conversations, which I imagine are things like, when there's a violation of code of conduct, or providing feedback for community members. So observation really keeps community managers alive to the community so that they can support them. And I have another note circling back to observation, and that is that there is absolutely no hierarchy in the observer's world. When you are observing, you are one part of this large and vast universe. And it's kind of like how Montessori would observe at the level of the child. So Austin Kleon says, be a teacher or remain a student, and that's true. You have to really take on the perspective of whoever you're observing to understand them. Oops. Just make sure the right slide is, there we go. I think taking that observational stance is the key to, it's like staying young, but biological age really has nothing to do with it. It's the key to staying in touch with people who are at every stage of the software journey. So it's really hard to teach experts because you have to be an expert yourself. But the thing about being an expert is that it just takes time and investment. You don't have to be a genius to be an expert at something. You just have to invest the time over the years in learning about something, and then you become an expert. But once you're there, once you are an expert, you actually might struggle to teach a beginner because you've forgotten what they don't know and how they've come to know what they do know now. I think that relates back to what James was saying in the beginning, learn, build, teach. It's helpful as you're learning to keep that fresh beginner perspective and then turn around and teach it to someone else right away. So let me tell you about the most difficult thing that I have ever taught in my life. It had nothing to do with tech, and it wasn't in college when I was helping other students learn things about ancient Greek math. This hardest concept that I ever taught was the color yellow. And you might be forgiven for thinking, right, what could be simpler than the color yellow? But at the same time, you can't point to yellow itself, right? You can point to a yellow thing, but you can't just bring your students to a museum and say, behold, this is yellow. And some philosophers actually thought or think you can do that. I disagree with them, but that's not the point of the talk. But anyway, one morning at the Montessori school, I was tasked with catching a 3-year-old up on their colors, starting with yellow. And I just had no idea what to do because I forgot how I'd learned it in the first place. What we eventually did, with a little bit of guidance from my lead, was walk around the classroom, and I pointed out 4 or 5 yellow things. Here's a yellow lemon, here's a yellow duck, here's a yellow coat. And then I said, can you point out something yellow? And they pointed to some grapes. I said, well, that's purple, can you point to something yellow? And we repeated that process for a week or so until they had it. But in the beginning, this was really hard for me because I had regarded yellow as such a fundamental concept that I'd completely forgotten how to teach it. So in order to share my expertise, I had to become a peer of my student. So when we're observing, we're learning about how we learn, and that's really valuable. So another thing that Don Norman observed was checklists. And checklists are really best done as a live team sport because if you do them by yourself or asynchronously, it gets really easy to think, oh, I'll get back to that, and then never do it. So like if you're going to the grocery store and you need eggs, bread, and milk, and you see your favorite sourdough is still being stocked, I'll get back to that. And then you get your eggs and milk, and then all of a sudden you're in the car and you've forgotten the bread. Now, you'll be comforted to know that flight crews use checklists to determine the safety of an airplane before takeoff. And the way that they do this without forgetting a key safety item on the checklist is that in the FAA, the junior, or the first officer, reads out loud and makes sure the pilot executes the tasks on the checklist. And this switching of responsibilities and roles, that prevents errors where status could be abused to make mistakes. So that's just another example of how people with different experience levels and perspectives can work together to make a better process. So this is a meme. It says, the UI is quite simple. The client will easily figure it out. And the interface says, hold your finger, and there's a fingerprint, which we assume means that the person should put their fingerprint on the interface, but they're holding their own finger. And honestly, I don't find memes like this all that funny, because I think that given an observational perspective, the client's not dumb here. The copy should be updated, right? Similarly, there is no such thing as a dumb developer. Sure, we've met the ones that kind of want to be fed an answer with problem solving, but that's a different thing. It's if there's a developer-made error, that's usually pointing to a real problem with the tool that we're working on. And that's so valuable because that's showing us where their expectations are. It can help us improve what we're working on. So what do we do after observing? What did we do with the stingray? Well, we wrote it down. How do we write stuff down in software? I'm not against using this piece of ancient technology. I think pen and paper is great. It's great for ideation, which is not observation, but those are the notes that from my talk when I was making them for this talk today. And then, but they're also great for jotting stuff down when you're talking to someone, because it makes you pay attention to them, and it makes you really slow down when you're making a live observation of behavior. The other advantage is that your brain activity is actually stronger when you observe with a pen and paper, so your recall is better. And then, some of us who code are fairly familiar with these tools, but Jira, GitLab, and GitHub are good for both collaborative observation, like using issues to observe developers, PRs for recording the development of your software, things like that. But you can also use them for your own personal notes as well. And then many people's favorite note tools like Obsidian, Notion, and GitHub, you can use those to create personal notes and digital gardens. Digital gardens are kind of like just a collection of online public notes that are made by you and connected in some way or another, and they develop and grow. It's an interesting concept. Again, besides that and Kafka, come and talk to me about those. I would love to keep going on that. But the point is to write it down. Don't be like Fermat. This is a cautionary tale. So there's this mathematician named Fermat, born in 1665, and he had a proof for this equation, which is x then plus y to the n equals z to the n. And he said, I have a truly marvelous demonstration of this proposition, which this margin that he wrote this note down is too narrow to contain. And then he died soon after writing that note. And it took 300 years for mathematicians to come up with a proof for that equation. And it was cool, but they also don't think it was the same one because it's a really, really long proof. So the point is, don't be like Fermat, write it down. A question that I recommend writing down the answers to when you're making an observation are who, what, when, and where. I didn't put why there because why could be making an assumption. That's for when you're reflecting on these notes, right? Some examples, you could be observing, this observation writes itself a little bit because you've got this issue in your repository, but what if you had two developers who filed issues for ARIA labels on the home page, and it was during the space of the last month on GitHub? That would be something you want to pay attention to and reflect on. Or another example, say I had 3 audience members who asked me about Kafka consumer decompression during the last 2 Q&As at a local meetup. That would be something I want to pay attention to again, and maybe spend a little bit more time observing there, or tweak my talk at the local meetup a little bit. So we have observation, we make our notes. What is next? And yes, that is the water cycle again. The elementary school teacher in me will just never die. We want to do something about it, right? Especially if the observation is pointing to a gap in the experience in the tool that we're designing. And here's some examples from different fields about that whole cycle. So say we're making a Montessori observation. This is from the website, themontessorinotebook.com, by the way. It's, if you're interested in that kind of thing, it's great. But we're making an observation in the category of gross motor skills, which, as opposed to fine motor skills like writing or weaving, means using just large portions of our body, right? So a child crawls to the top of the stairs. They turn to an adult and put their arms in the air. Based on that observation, you might teach them to come backwards down the stairs by themselves, because the point of all education is to get the student to be independent. In the field of design, you make an observation about the signifier in your shower. Every guest that you have in your home asks about which way is cold and hot in the shower dial. What you might do is add red or blue colors to the cold and hot sites. Say you are building a command line interface, and you have a developer filing an issue in your repository, and they're confusing the -F flag, which is force in your command line interface, with a -F flag for file. What you might do there is add a clear flag for this functionality, like -- file, and write it all out. Now, it can be hard. I think, honestly, the what you might do part, that's the hardest part, because you might never have encountered the problem that you've encountered before, and so you kind of have to hypothesize, and then you might end up, in your observation cycle again if it doesn't work. But I deeply, deeply believe in the power of communities like this one to put you in contact with people who have experienced the problem before. And this is why. So, when I was telling you about how I was learning to code, that wasn't the entire story. I encountered some roadblocks. One of them was I didn't have an in-person group for support when I was learning to code during the pandemic. And again, like I said, I was sharing childcare with my husband. My child was super new, 2 months old. It was my first child, so I was new to parenting as well. At the same time, new to tech. Pretty much everything was scary. And then, you've heard that part of the story before, but on top of that, I was doing an online boot camp. It was a 9-month boot camp, and in the middle of it, I found out that I was unexpectedly pregnant. And my husband and I were kind of shocked, right? It was a surprise. But we didn't really have any time to process it before I started, a few days later, experiencing some excruciating pain in my right side. And we were rushed to the ER, and it was there. I had to leave my husband outside the door. I was alone. It was there that I received a diagnosis that the pregnancy was ectopic. So if you don't know what that is, by the way, it's when the embryo fails to implant in the uterus and it implants somewhere else in your body. And so the doctors that day in the hospital, under the stress of caring for COVID patients as well, they saved my life. But I was alone in the hospital when I lost my baby. And I was left with some lingering health issues that took a very long time to figure out. So I had nightmares at night. And the stress and grief during the day made it very difficult to learn to code. My critical thinking was very blurry at that time. And we all know that's the skill that you need to learn how to code. So I needed help from a more experienced set of people, some extra tutoring, because the asynchronous nature of the boot camp I was in was not cutting it. And so I turned to help from more experienced people online, in particular, the people at Virtual Coffee, which was founded by Becca Hart-Weigel. And these developers, they paired with me. They spent a lot of time and patience on my development of skills, including using a code editor, some basic Python and JavaScript syntax. And their impact on my technical skills was very deep, and I wouldn't be standing here today without them. Now, I've since healed from that experience, but the habit remains. Whenever I'm confronted with a big new problem in an observational tech cycle, I wonder, well, who has encountered this problem before? And I go consult them. And that saves me a lot of time. It will save you entire cycles of observation too, if you can take advice from others who have been there before. It's like getting on that, in the airport with the horizontal escalator. It's like getting on that and starting walking. It'll just speed up your problem-solving process. But I also want to say, if you've been through a lot of observational cycles while you're solving some kind of problem inside tech, that's okay. You're going to get there. You're going to solve the problem. It's okay to make mistakes. That's how we observe. Keep going. You got this. You will figure it out. You have observation and community on your side. I'd like to present myself as a person in the community that you can connect with. And you can use that QR code to go to my GitHub. My socials are listed there. I would be really interested to talk to any one of you about anything that interested you in this talk, or just learn about you and your background. So that's how to interface with me, but that's it. Thank you so much.
I think one of my biggest takeaways at that conferences that I've been to is the stories and the vulnerability that people have shown on this stage, and I think that's been very well represented in each of the keynotes that we've had so far, has been in the past, and will continue to be represented. But can we get one additional round of applause specifically for an amazing keynote, but also the courage, the transparency, and the ability to be vulnerable enough with an audience to share how real life is and how we all have our experiences. We're all people and we're all together. So one more round of applause for that. There's one other thing that really stands out to me, and this is something, it's funny, like I have these ideas in my head that I talk about a lot, and then I hear other people explain it, and I'm like, that was like much better researched and explained than I could ever do. But I've always kind of preached to people in beginner to intermediate situations, specifically as developers, that the best person to teach something is the person that just learned it. Because having written code for 10 plus years, I don't remember what it's like to not know what a for loop is. I don't remember what it's like to not know how to write a function or to not know what a function is. I can remember like sweating in class occasionally and not wanting to answer questions or be called on. But I will never fully remember what it's like to learn one of those things that I/we take for granted every day. And just out of curiosity, like from an audience perspective, how many people are at the beginning stage of their career, looking for a first job, in your first job, first or second, first couple of years of your career? Handful of hands, awesome. I would encourage you to take that. I'm a big advocate of brand, which we've heard people talk about personal brand and content and all these things. I would encourage you to continue to share your journeys. You never know what impact your journey will have on individuals, and I can see some very direct correlation between Lucia and Becca that is very, very impactful, and I can only imagine the conversations, I don't know this, but that you've probably had behind the scenes, probably very emotional. But those sort of communities are at least part of what led to this opportunity to be able to share that story on this stage. So people, especially early in your careers, I encourage you to share. I encourage you to soak up whatever you have around you, to ask questions, to force yourself to not be scared to ask questions. That's the number one thing I think that people have trouble with. So take your learning as a benefit that you can share with the community. I kind of considered, talks start at 10:30. Someone confirm. Right, so we've got 35 minutes. I thought it might be neat to take a couple minutes and put you on the spot to wonder if a few of you might be open to sharing some sort of takeaway from the last couple of days. Someone that you met, a connection that you made, something that you learned that you didn't know about, something that you're proud of that you accomplished. Think about that. Raise your hands. I would like, Becca, if you could run a mic around, if we could get just a couple of people involved, and then we'll have time after this. I'll give you one for me. I love roller coasters and water parks. A lot of people are probably in the same boat. But I have my limits of what I'm comfortable with. People can probably relate to that as well. And I forced myself beyond those limits last night. This is like a really big deal for me. Probably nobody else cares, and some people just would have done it anyway. But you know, people that went to the water park, they have the ones that like you stand in the tube and then the floor just bottoms out and then you go down. Does that scare anybody else? Like I have specific limits with things that I do. And I also have kind of preached to people as I have a platform and a stage to stand on that I have looked at things that I know will be beneficial in my career, no matter how nervous and uncomfortable they make me. I forced myself to do that. And so last night, this is a big moment for me of being like literally more terrified than you can imagine, unless you were in the same boat, of my brother-in-law mentioned potentially doing the ride. I was like, yeah, that's cool, have fun. And then I just thought about it, and I thought, this is an experience that I don't want to miss out on. And I kind of tried to go like cold inside, so I didn't think about anything on the way up, but I like walked the like 50,000 steps to the top and finally did it. And that was a big like mental achievement for me, although it's not tech related, but it was a big one of just forcing myself outside of my comfort zone. And I think some of that, a lot of people are uncomfortable to share here. So if you have something that you're debating about sharing, I would encourage you to kind of push outside of your comfort zone and share that just for a couple of minutes. Do we have a comment? Yes.
Hey everybody, Brandon. I've been coming to that conference for all but the first year, actually. And a lot of you see me normally with a camera in my face, and I say hi, take your picture, you hear me clicking in the back, things like that. And I don't know what it is about this year, but people that I've seen probably for the last 5, 6, 7 years made a connection, like just added on LinkedIn, had a good conversation, and it's just funny, you get used to seeing familiar faces, but you don't always stop to say hi or have a conversation or really invest even for 5 minutes. And this year, for whatever reason, it was different, and I did that multiple times, extended my network, and the weird indicator I often use is if I type you in LinkedIn and I see that third plus ring, right? That means like you don't have connections up to that point. Always blows my mind because I run into so many of you like here or other Midwest conferences or Texas or things like that. And it's like, how have we not connected, or how have we not at least had a shared connection somewhere along the way? So I had added at least like 5 or 10 people in these few days just because I stopped for 5 minutes and had a conversation. So, talk, meet, sit somewhere, meet somebody.
Love it, thank you. You just can't overstate it. I hope that people continue to reiterate this theme. And it's great to hear from individual people who have those takeaways of the investment of people in your time and getting the most out of what you're doing here. We have another one.
Hi, I'm Michael Ellis. I am the community manager at Ionic. And this year we're doing something a little bit different and a little bit scary, to be honest. We have a conference that we've done, and for the first time ever, we're doing it in person in Austin, Texas. That's a little bit scary. It's kind of like putting together a birthday party. You feel a lot of ownership over this project. It's your baby. You're building it and organizing it, and now it's like, will people come? And so we're at that scary point where we're starting to sell tickets, and we've had our speakers apply, and it's been a great turnout, but it's like, okay, now it's time for ticket sales and sponsors, and that can be daunting, and it can feel very scary as a project. So it's great to come to an event like this, and I know we've been sponsoring for 8 years, but it's great to come back every year, because it's like a playbook. You get to see how many things are done well and executed with thought and care and attention to detail. So it's really great to be at that conference, to see the community that's been built, and to try to, learn from the best and emulate that so that we can recreate that for the community that we love and support.
Love that, yes. And if you haven't been yet, the Ionic booth is right around the corner, so make sure to stop by. I think maybe 1 or 2 more, and then we'll get into a break for a few minutes.
Yeah, my name is Andrew, by the way. I brought my son and my wife this week. I was very nervous to do it at first. I was concerned about, they might be bored or whatever, but I just wanted to give a huge shout out to Scott and the young adults working in that STEM room. My son is having such an amazing time, and he's learning so much. He's excited every night. He's just nonstop talk and questions. And so I just want to encourage you adults that have little kids, bring them next year. It's totally worth it.
100%. From a family perspective, there's really just nothing like this, and I'm kind of excited to now be in that family situation. We've got a 2-month-old, so there's not much that she gets out of this yet, but we've talked several times about the idea of being back here year after year and kind of seeing her grow up and get more out of what's going on, the activities, the water park, et cetera. That's very special. Thank you.
My name is Brett, and I want to give a shout out to the that ADHD open table. That was a chance for me to learn about other people's experiences. That really helped me, I think, understand what something that my kid is going through, and that was really cool. And I'm really looking forward to that being a community that I could connect to that I never knew existed before.
Wow. Yeah. Just further reiterating, more than tech, more than programming, more than code, we're people. We have families, we have situations, we have experiences. There's so much of that we can get out of this time together. So let's do one more, and then we'll kind of move towards a break.
I'm Therese. I'm way in the back. I teach 4th grade, and last year I came as the babysitter to my BFF, Amanda, we're both single moms, and so I came to watch the kids and go to the water park. This year, she got me in. I went to mostly the kid classes and had a lot of fun. And then I went to one grown-up class about the history of computer programming or coding. And anytime everyone else laughed at a joke, I'd laugh because I had no idea what the tech jokes were. But next year, I plan to come back, go in the grown-up classes, and know what I'm laughing at the jokes, because I'm going to teach myself coding, and I already got some advice on where to go to do that. So I'm excited to start a new route in my life.
Yes. Maybe one last thought on that. That's incredible. Maybe one last thought to take away is the idea of manifestation. I talked about that a little bit with Mandy, and manifesting her goal of being on the stage in a couple of years, learning to code, being a part of the jokes. I brought my brother-in-law, who's an art teacher, no tech background at all, brought him to the bar Wednesday night, and we were kind of joking back and forth about whether he would just pretend to be in tech and make up JavaScript frameworks and then look down on other people who had never heard of them. But now you get to be a part of a very fun ecosystem and community and inside jokes. So maybe take a 30-second pause and ask yourself if there's something that you can see, that you could start to think about, that you could start to manifest, that you might be able to reflect on 1 year from now. So just take 30 seconds or so. Just so you know, when you're on stage and everyone is potentially looking at you, counting down 30 seconds, it feels like it lasts a very long time. But hopefully that gives you something that you can reflect back on in a year. Want to reiterate a couple things. Make sure, check the lost and found. The swag store is still open. Please invest time in the survey. We've got 25 minutes before the next series of talks. Take 2 or 3 of those minutes and fill out the survey. That would be greatly, greatly appreciated. And I think, Lucia, are you still comfortable kind of staying down here for a few minutes to have questions and conversations? If anyone is interested, feel free to come and join down here to ask questions and have a conversation with Lucia. And then lastly, remember, as we kind of walk into the last hours of today and the event as a whole, to get everything out of this you can. And that's different for people. There's different amount of energy levels and And social capacity, like being around people, we all have different levels, but whatever you have to give to other people and to get out for yourself, make sure to invest that in these last couple of hours that we have together. Enjoy.